we go. Very good. So welcome back, everybody, to our fourth installment of Where the Red Fern Grows. Joined today by Lukey, and Beamer's down there. He's our fat dog that we love so much. And I think the dogs are sick of us because we've been home way too long. And so they kind of want us to leave, I think. I'm not quite sure. So Luke, yesterday, chapter 3, he went into Grandpa's store, and what happened?
Candy.
He got candy, and he also told Grandpa some good news. What was that good news?
That he saved money.
That he saved money. And how much did he save?
$50.
$50. And could you imagine working 2 years for $50? That's crazy, isn't it?
It's not worth it.
It's not worth it. Do you think it's going to be worth it to him?
Mm-hmm.
Because we live in a different day and time, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Things are given to kids a little bit more. And one of the greatest things you're ever going to find is when you work for something, how much better it feels when you earn it. So we are on chapter 4, Where the Red Fern Grows, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So thanks for joining us, those of you who are joining us. Mr. Abandon's here. I am excited to see him. Are you excited to see him?
Mm-hmm.
I am too. I think I'm going to follow that joker right there because I don't know who it is, but anyone who's tuning in regularly is I'm excited about. So let's begin. Chapter 4. Day after day, I flew to the store. Grandpa would shake his head. And then on a Monday, as I entered the store, I sensed a change in him. He was in high spirits, talking and laughing with half a dozen farmers. Every time I caught his eye, he would smile and wink at me. I thought the farmers would never leave, but finally the store was empty. Grandpa told me the letter had come. The kennels were still there and they had dogs for sale. He said he had made the mail buggy wait while he had made out the order. And another thing, the dog market had gone downhill. The price of the dogs had dropped $5. He handed me a $10 bill. Now there's still one stump in the way, he said. The mail buggy can't carry things like dogs, so they'll come as far as the depot at Tahlequah. But you'll get the notice here because I ordered them in your name. I thanked my grandfather with all my heart and asked him how long I'd have to wait for the notice. He said, I don't know, but it shouldn't take more than a couple weeks. I asked how I was going to get my dogs out from Tahlequah. Well, there's always someone going in, he said, and you could ride in with them. That evening, the silence of our supper was interrupted when I asked my father this question. Papa, how far is Kentucky? I may have as well as exploded a bomb. For an instant, there was complete silence, and then my oldest sister giggled. The two little ones just stared at me. With a half-hearted laugh, my father said, well now, I don't know, but it's pretty good ways. What do you want to know for, thinking about taking a trip to Kentucky? No, I said, I just wondered. My youngest sister giggled and asked, can I go with you? I glared at her. Mama broke into the conversation. Well, I declare, what kind of question is that? How far is Kentucky? I don't know what's gotten into that mind of yours lately. You go around like you were lost and you're losing weight. You're as skinny as a rail and look at that hair. Just last Sunday, they had a haircutting over at Tom Rollins' place, but you couldn't go. You had to go prowling around the river and the woods. I told Mama that I'd get a haircut next time they had a cutting, and I just heard some fellows talking about Kentucky up at the store and wondered how far away it was. Much to my relief, the conversation was ended. The days dragged by. A week passed, and still no word about my dogs. Terrible thoughts ran through my mind. Maybe my dogs were lost. The train had a wreck, someone stole my money, or perhaps the mailman lost my order. And then, at the end of the second week, the notice came. My grandfather told me that he had talked to Jim Hodges that day. He was going into town about a week, and I could ride with him to pick up my dogs. Again, I thanked my grandfather. I started for home. Walking along in deep thought, I decided it was time to tell my father the whole story. I fully intended to tell him that evening. I tried several times, but somehow I just couldn't. I wasn't scared of him, for he never whipped me. He was always kind and gentle. But for some reason, I don't know why, I just couldn't tell him. That night, snuggled deep in the soft folds of a feathered bed, I lay thinking. I had waited so long for my dogs, and I so desperately wanted to see them and hold them. I didn't want to wait a whole week. In a flash, I made up my mind. Very quietly, I got up and put on my clothes. I sneaked into the kitchen and got one of Mama's precious flour sacks, and in it I put 6 eggs, some leftover cornbread, a little salt, and a few matches. Next, I went to the smokehouse and cut off a piece of salt pork. I stopped at the barn and picked up a gunny sack. I put the flour sack inside the gunny sack. This I rolled up and crammed lengthwise in the bib of my overalls. I was on my way. I was going after my dogs. Tahlequah was a small country town with a population of about 800. By the road, it was 32 miles, but as the crow flies, it was only 20 miles. I went as the crow flies, straight through those hills. Although I had never been to town in my whole life, I knew a direction to take. Tahlequah and the railroad lay on the other side of the river from our place. I had the Frisco Railroad on my right and the Illinois River on my left. Not far from where the railroad crossed, the river lay the town of Tahlequah. I knew if I bore to the right, I'd find the railroad, and if I bore to the left, I'd have the river to guide me. Sometime that night, I crossed on a riffle somewhere in the Dripping Springs County. Coming out of the river bottoms, I scattered up a long hog-back ridge and broke out in the top and the flats. In a mile-eating trot, I moved along. I had the wind of a deer, the muscles of a country boy, a heart full of dog love and a strong determination. I wasn't scared of the darkness, of the mountains, for I was raised in those mountains. On and on, mile after mile, I moved along. I saw faint gray streaks appear in the east. I knew daylight was close. My bare feet were getting sore from the flint rocks and saw briars. I stopped beside a mountain stream, soaked my feet in the cool water, and rested for a spell, and then started on. After leaving the mountain stream, my pace was much slower. The muscles of my legs were getting stiff. Feeling the pangs of hunger gnawing at my stomach, I decided I would stop to eat in the next stream I found. Then I remembered I had forgotten to include a can in which to boil my eggs. I stopped and built a small fire. Cutting off a nice thick slab of salt pork, I roasted it and with a piece of old cornbread made a sandwich. Putting out my fire, I was on my way again. I ate as I trotted along and felt much better. I came into Tahlequah from the northeast. At the outskirts of town, I hid my flour sack and provisions. Keeping the gunny sack, I walked into town. I was scared of Tahlequah and its people. I'd never seen such a big town and so many people. There were store after store, some of them 2 stories high. The wagon yard had wagons on top of wagons, team, buggies, and horses. 2 young ladies about my age stopped and stared at me and then giggled. My blood boiled. But I could understand. After all, I had 3 sisters. They couldn't help it because they were women folks. I went on. I saw a big man coming up the street. A bright shiny star in his vest looked as big as a bucket. I saw the long black gun at his side and I froze in my tracks. I'd heard of sheriffs and marshals, but I'd never actually seen one. Stories repeated about them in the mountains told how fast they were with a gun and how many men they had killed. The closer he came, the more frightened I got. I knew it was the end for me. I could just see him aiming his big black gun and shoot me right between the eyes. It seemed like a miracle that he passed by, hardly glancing at me. Breathing a sigh, I walked on, seeing the wonders of this world. Passing a large window, I stopped and stared. There in the window was the most wonderful sight I had ever seen. Everything under the sun, overalls, jackets, bolts of beautiful cloth, new harnesses, collars, bridles, and then my eyes did pop open. There were several guns, and one of them had 2 barrels. I couldn't believe it, 2 barrels. I had seen several guns, but never one with 2 barrels. Then I saw something else. The sun was just right, and the plate glass was a perfect mirror. I saw the full reflection of myself for the first time in my life. I could see that I did look a little odd. My straw-colored hair was long and shaggy and was brushed out like a corn tassel that had been hit by the wind. I tried to smooth it down with my hands. This helped some, but not much. What it needed was a good comb, and I had no comb. My overalls were patched and faded, but they were clean. My shirt had pulled out, so I tucked it back in. I took one look at my bare feet and just winced. They were as brown as dead sycamore leaves. The spiderweb pattern of raw red scratches looked odd in the saddle brown skin. I thought, well, I won't have to pick any more blackberries and scratches will soon go away. I pumped up one of my arms and thought surely the muscle was going to pop right through my thin blue shirt. I stuck out my tongue. It was as red as a pokeberry juice, and anything that color was supposed to be healthy. After making a few faces at myself, I put my thumbs in my ears and was making mule ears when 2 old women came by. They stopped and stared at me. I stared back. As they turned to go on their way, I heard one of them saying to the other, the words were hard to catch, but I did hear one word: wild. As I said before, they couldn't help it. They were women folk. As I turned to leave, my eyes again fell on the overalls and bolts of cloth. I thought of my mother, father, and sisters. Here was an opportunity to make amends for leaving home without telling anyone. I entered the store. I bought a pair of overalls for my papa. After telling the storekeeper how big my mother and sisters were, I bought several yards of cloth. I also bought a large sack of candy. Glancing down at my bare feet, the storekeeper said, "I have some good shoes." I told him I didn't need any shoes. He asked if that would be all. I nodded. He added up the bill. I handed him my $10 and he gave me my change. After wrapping up the bundles, he helped me put them in my sack. Lifting it to my shoulder, I turned and left the store. Out on the street, I picked out a friendly-looking old man and asked him where the depot was. He told me to go down to the last street and turn right, go as far as I could, and I couldn't miss it. I thanked him and started on my way. Leaving the main part of town, I started up a long street through the residential section. I'd never seen so many beautiful houses, and they were all different colors. The lawns were neat and clean and looked like green carpets. I saw a man pushing some kind of mowing machine. I stopped to watch the whirling blades. He gawked at me, and I hurried on. I heard a lot of shouting and laughing ahead of me. Not wanting to miss anything, I walked a little faster. I saw what was making all the noise. More kids than I had ever seen were playing around a big red brick building. I thought some rich man lived there and was going to give a party for his children. Walking up to the edge of the playground, I stopped to watch. The boys and girls were about my age and were as thick as flies around a sorghum mill. They were milling, running, and jumping, teeter-tottering, and swings were loaded down with them. Everyone was laughing and having a big old time. Over against the building, a large blue pipe ran up on an angle from the ground. A few feet from the top, there was a bend in it. The pipe seemed to go into the building. Boys were crawling into its dark mouth. I counted 9 of them. One boy stood about 6 feet from the opening with a stick in his hand. Staring, goggle-eyed, trying to figure out what they were doing, I got a surprise. Out of the hollow pipe spurted a boy. The boy with the stick marked the ground where he landed. All 9 of them came just a shooting out one behind the other. As each boy landed, a new mark was scratched. They ganged around looking at the lines. There was a lot of loud talking, pointing, and arguing. Then all the lines were erased and a new scorekeeper was picked out. The others crawled back into the pipe. I figured out how the game was played. After climbing to the top of the slide, the boys turned around and sat down. One at a time, they came flying down and out, feet first. The one that shot out the furthest was the winner. I thought how wonderful it would be if I could slide down just one time. One boy, spying me standing on the corner, came over. Looking at me up and down, he asked, "You go to school here?" I said, "School?" He said, "Sure, school. What do you think it is?" No, I don't go to school here." "Do you go to Jefferson?" "No, I don't go there either." "Don't you go to school at all?" "Sure, I go to school." "Where?" "At home." "You go to school at home?" I nodded. "What grade are you in?" I said I wasn't in any grade. Puzzled, he said, "You go to school at home and don't know what grade you're in? Who teaches you?" "My mother." "What does she teach you?" "Reading, writing, arithmetic, and I bet I'm just as good as you are." He asked, "Don't you have any shoes?" I said, "Sure, I have shoes." "Why aren't you wearing them?" "I don't wear shoes until it gets cold." He laughed and asked where I lived. I said, "Back in the hills." He said, "Oh, you're a hillbilly." He ran back to the mob. I saw him pointing at me and talking to several boys. They started my way, yelling, "Hillbilly! Hillbilly!" Just before they reached me, a bell started ringing. Turning, they ran to the front of the building, lined up along 2 lines, and marched like little tin soldiers disappearing into the school. The playground was silent. I was all alone and felt lonely and sad. I heard a noise on my right. I didn't have time to turn around to recognize what it was. Someone was using a hoe. I'd know that sound if I heard it on a dark night. It was a little old white-headed woman working in a flower bed. Looking again at the long blue pipe, I thought, there's no one around. Maybe I could just have one slide anyway. I eased over and looked up into the dark hollow. It looked scary, but I thought of all the other boys I had seen crawl into it. I could see the last mark on the ground and thought, I bet I can beat that. Laying my sack down, I started climbing up. The farther I went, the darker and more scary it got. And just as I reached the top, my feet slipped. Down I sailed, all the way down. I tried to grab onto something, but there was nothing to grab. I'm sure some great champions had slid out of that pipe, and no doubt more than one world record had been broken. But if someone had been there when I came out, I know that record I set would stand today in all its glory. I came out just like I went in, feet first and belly down. My legs were spread out like a bean shooter's stalk, arms flailing in the air. I zoomed out and up. I seemed to hang suspended in air at the peak of my climb. I could see the hard-packed ground below. As I started down, I shut my eyes and gritted my teeth. And that didn't help. With a splattering sound, I landed. I felt the air whoosh out between my teeth. I tried to scream, but had no wind left to make a sound. After bouncing a couple of times, I finally settled down to the earth. I lay spread-eagled for a few seconds and then slowly got to my knees. Hearing loud laughter, I looked around. It was that little old lady with the hoe in her hand. She hollered and asked how I liked it. Without answering, I grabbed up my gunny sack and left. Far up the street, I looked back, and that little old lady was sitting down, just a-rocking with laughter. I couldn't understand these town people. If they were staring at a fellow, they were always laughing at him. So he goes into town. Tomorrow, I believe we're going to see some puppies, my friends, and I'm excited about that. Luke, you got anything you want to share before we head out for the day? Anything? How's your break been? This has been weird, kind of not going to school and stuff. How's your break been?
I like it better than going to school.
I bet you do. Because the school hasn't started yet. We're on spring break here in Florida, and next week he'll be going on to distance learning. Any of my people watching right now, if your kids are doing distance learning, I would encourage you to make sure you just get a book. If you want to follow along with this one, watch the videos on YouTube as you go. I think I'm going to be providing some questions and stuff, but I think it's just a good coming-of-age story right here. So we've been busy working around the house and playing a bunch of games and just generally chilling out with the dogs. But next week we're going to actually start distance learning. I'm curious to see how distance learning is going with you all. And so that's our story for the day. Tomorrow we're going to go on to chapter 5. The plot's going to thicken a little bit, and I'm excited about that as well. So thank you all for joining us today and joining Luke and I, and we'll be back tomorrow at 3. I hope Beamer doesn't bite anyone. Oh, never mind. Our dog does bite sometimes. He's little, but he's fierce, so it's all good. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll join you tomorrow at 3 o'clock sharp to study chapter 3. And if you missed the reading, or if you want to share it with your kids or anything like that, you can go to youtube.com/MRBTEACH. And we've got all the chapters there that we're recording as we go, because I think we're going to be at our houses for a little bit here, and we might as well learn some good story in the process. Thanks again for joining, and we will see you tomorrow.